Once upon a time, in a land far away, there lived a prince who wanted to marry a princess. He wanted a true princess, someone with grace and kindness and noble spirit. So he traveled far across the world, over wide oceans and rocky mountains, through dark forests and endless deserts to find her. The prince met hundreds of rich and glamorous royal ladies. They wore golden crowns, glittering with jewels, and lived in huge castles and marble palaces. They dressed in fine silks and velvets and threw feasts and dances in his honor. But not one of them seemed to him to be a true princess. There was always something about them that was not as it should be. They were vain, or they were greedy. Some were proud and others were arrogant. Nowhere could he find a lady who was pure and gentle, as a true princess should be. So he came all the way home again to his kingdom. The people rejoiced, for they loved their prince. But he was sad. He sat on his lonely throne, wondering if he would grow old before he found the lady he dreamed of. One evening, a terrible storm blew up, shaking the sky with thunder and lightning and stirring the forests with violent winds. The rain poured down, people shuttered their doors and windows, and small creatures shivered with cold and fear in their burrows. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, a knocking was heard at the city gate. The old king got up from his bedchamber, wrapped himself in his cloak, and followed by the prince and his queen, he made his way through the bitter wind and rain to open it. There was a young woman standing there, drenched by the rain and wind. The water ran down from her hair and her clothes, into the toes of her shoes, and out again at the heels. She looked like a beggar, but on her head gleamed a thin circlet of gold. "I am a princess," she said, "and I seek shelter. My kingdom is lost, and I have nowhere to go." The prince was moved by her plight in the cold, dark night and welcomed her in. "My name is Valiant, Prince Valiant. At your service," he said. The queen looked the bedraggled visitor up and down. "We'll soon find out if she's telling the truth," she thought. She ordered her servants to prepare the best guest bedroom with its huge four-poster bed. At the very bottom of this bed, the queen laid a tiny pea. On top of it, she put 20 mattresses as plump and springy as marshmallows. Then her maids brought 20 quilts stuffed with the softest swan's down. On top of these, they laid 20 silk pillows filled with gossamer and clouds. The princess climbed up the huge mountain of bedding and had to lie there all night. All through the long night, she tossed and turned. No matter how she lay, something hard was digging into her. By morning, her skin was sore and bruised, and she was exhausted from lack of sleep. Pale and tired, she came down to breakfast with the king, the queen, and the prince. They asked how she had slept. "I thank you for your hospitality," the poor princess said, "but I'm afraid I could not sleep a wink. I scarcely closed my eyes all night. I was lying on something terribly hard, and I'm now black and blue all over my body." Because of this, they knew that she was a real princess. Only a true lady of the noblest blood could be sensitive enough to feel a tiny pea through 20 quilts, 20 mattresses, and 20 pillows. The prince was overjoyed. He had fallen in love with her from the first minute he'd seen her. even when her hair was wet with rain and her clothes damp with mud. And even without the pea, he had guessed that she was a real princess. And now he asked her to marry him and share his kingdom. "I will marry you, but first I must save my people," the princess said. She told them how her country had been taken over by an evil sorcerer who had oppressed her people and banished her from her own home. The king promised to send his army to rescue her people and throw the sorcerer out. When the queen went to retrieve the pea, she was amazed to find that it had turned into a glittering emerald. Oh, not only is she a true princess, but she has fairy blood running through her veins, the queen thought. The emerald pea was set into a crown for the royal wedding, where it shone like a star over the princess. Afterwards, it was put into the palace museum, where it was said to grant good luck to all that saw it. It may still be seen there, if no one has stolen it. This happened many centuries ago, in a land far away, but it is a true story. Once upon a time, there were 25 tin soldiers painted with bright uniforms of red and blue. They were all brothers, cast from the same old tin spoon. Each soldier looked exactly alike, except for one. He was the last to be made, and the tin had run out, leaving him with only one leg. But he stood just as steadfast as his brothers. The soldiers belonged to a small boy. He had dozens of toys, from balls and clowns to a magnificent model castle. The castle had high walls and turrets and windows to peep inside. White wax swans swam outside on a lake of mirror surrounded by miniature trees. But most beautiful of all was the tiny dancer who stood at the castle door. She wore a necklace hung with a glittering sequin. Because she stood in pirouette on one foot, the tin soldier thought she must just have one leg, like him. "Oh, she is so lovely," he sighed, "but she is too grand to be the wife of a simple soldier like me." So the little tin soldier hid behind a snuff box and admired the dancer from a distance. No matter how long she stood on one leg in her pirouette, she never lost her balance. At night, the boy put all his toys away. 24 of the soldiers went back into their box. But the little tin soldier, hiding behind the snuff box, was left outside. As soon as everyone in the house was asleep, the toys got up and began to play. They danced and fought battles and held picnics. The tin soldiers wanted to join in but were stuck in their box. They rattled the lid, but it wouldn't come off. The only two who stayed still were the one-legged tin soldier and the little dancer. She remained in her eternal pirouette, balanced on one toe, and he stood steadfast, gazing at her with love. But then the clock struck 12, there was a rap and a tap, and suddenly the lid flew off the snuff box. Out sprang a mischievous troll. He was a nasty creature with wild hair and an evil eye, and he wanted the dancer for himself. "Take your eyes off her," he told the soldier. The soldier pretended not to hear, but the wicked troll threatened him. "Just you wait until tomorrow." The next morning, the boy found the little toy soldier behind the snuff box and put him on the windowsill. Suddenly, there was an evil cackle from the snuff box, and a strange gust of wind blew the window open and knocked the tin soldier down into the street. The boy and his nursemaid ran down to find him. They looked all around, and although they nearly stepped on him, they didn't spot him. The soldier was too proud to shout out, thinking it was wrong to do so in uniform. So he was left in the street until it started to rain heavily. The water trickled over the cobblestones into puddles and streams surrounding the little soldier. When the rain cleared, 2 ragged urchins came by. "Look, here's a tin soldier. He's going for a sail," they said. They made a boat out of newspaper, put him in it, and set it off down the gutter. The rushing water carried the soldier along at a fearful speed, but he stood there bravely on his single leg. Suddenly, the water whirled the boat around and washed it into a dark drain. "Oh, where am I going?" the little soldier wondered. "This must be the evil troll's revenge. Oh, if only I had the beautiful dancer with me, I wouldn't mind being wet and cold and seasick." Suddenly, a huge water rat ran out and bared its yellow fangs. "Where's your passport?" the rat demanded. "Hand it over." But the tin soldier had no passport and refused to answer. "Stop him, he hasn't got a passport," shouted the angry rat, but the boat sailed on. Soon the little soldier glimpsed daylight ahead, but as it grew brighter, he heard a terrifying roar of water where the gutter poured into the great canal. The current grew stronger. There was no way back. The little soldier stood bravely as he was rushed over the edge in a huge waterfall. The boat plunged into the whirlpool below. It spun around once, twice, 3 times, filling up with water. The tin soldier thought of the beautiful dancer, whom he would never see again, and an old song rang in his ears. "Farewell, farewell, O warrior brave, nobody can from death thee save." The paper boat began to break apart. The soldier sank through and was swallowed whole by a huge fish. Oh, it was dark and dank inside the fish's belly, but the soldier clutched his musket firmly, even as the fish flopped and floundered around. Finally, the fish was still. A fisherman had caught it and delivered it to a kitchen table. A cook sliced it open, and the soldier saw daylight again. "It's the tin soldier," the cook said. She went upstairs to the nursery and gave him to the young boy. The tin soldier was back home again, and everything was just as it was. There was the boy, there were all the toys, and there was the magnificent castle. But best of all, the love of his life, the little dancer, still stood there, steadfast in her pirouette. He would have wept tears of joy, but soldiers never cry. The tin soldier and the dancer gazed at one another, but neither of them moved. Then suddenly the boy picked up the soldier and threw him into the fire. He had no reason to hurt the poor soldier. The evil troll must have cast a spell on him. The tin soldier stood there in the fierce heat, but he could not tell if it was the fire or the love that burned him. A long journey had worn his painted uniform away, and now he was brightly dressed again, in a livery of flames. He looked over at the dancer, and she looked at him, and still he stood steadfast, shouldering his musket. Then a gust of wind struck the dancer. She flew like a sylph across the room and into the fireplace next to the melting soldier. For a moment, she flared up into a pale flame, and then was gone. The next day, when the maid cleared the ashes, she found the soldier's remains. He had melted into the shape of a little tin heart. But nothing was left of the dancer, except her silver spangle, and it was burned as black as coal.
Once upon a time, in a summer long ago, the wheat fields were golden, the oats were green, and the hay was stacked high in the meadows. A magnificent old manor house stood surrounded by woods and ponds. The reeds had grown so high that summer that they nearly hid the water from view. Hidden in the reeds, a mother duck had made her nest, safe from weasels and the wily fox. She sat on her eggs, getting rather bored, for they took their time to hatch. Finally, she felt a tap, 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 and cracks started to appear in the smooth shells. With a pop and a peep, peep, a bunch of golden ducklings appeared. Their mother gave a delighted quack as she counted each fluffy gold head. But wait, the largest egg in the nest, her secret pride, was still there. Never before could she remember laying such a huge and splendid egg. How much longer would it take? Suddenly, there was a tap and a crack and a pop. The ducklings and their mother excitedly awaited the arrival of their final sibling, but they quacked with horror at the baby bird who emerged. For he was big and grey and ugly. He had huge feet and a broad beak and looked nothing like his brothers and sisters. The next day, the weather was perfectly splendid, and the ducklings went for their first swim. One by one, they plunged into the water, bobbing along in a golden line. Even the big grey duckling could swim. Despite his ungainly size, he held himself upright in a graceful style. Mother Duck quacked with delight. "See how nicely he uses those big feet. He is my very own son after all. Now follow me closely and watch out for the cat." The duck family waddled on their way into the yard. The sight of the big grey duckling caused an immediate commotion. "How strange he is," the other ducks said. "Look at his huge feet and his dull grey feathers. We won't stand for such an ugly fellow in our yard." And a handsome drake flew over and nipped him in the neck. "Leave him alone. He's not doing any harm," quacked Mother Duck. "He's too big and strange," the handsome drake replied, "and therefore he needs a good whacking." An elderly mallard peered down her beak at Mother Duck's brood. "Your other children are very pretty," she said, "but not that one. He's the wrong shape. It's a pity you can't hatch him again." Mother Duck was sad. She knew he was big and grey and ugly, but he was still her little duckling. Alas, life only got worse for the poor ugly duckling. Every day he was pecked and pushed and jeered and joshed by the ducks and even the chickens. "He's too big, he's too ugly," they clucked. Gobbler the turkey was the worst. He puffed up like a ship under full sail and gobbled at him until he was red in the face. One day, the poor ugly duckling could take it no more. He ran far away from home until he ended up at a swamp where only wild ducks lived. "You're an ugly fellow," the wild ducks told him, "but you can stay here, so long as you don't marry any of us." But the poor ugly duckling wasn't thinking of marriage. He just wanted to hide away in the reeds where no one could see him and mock him. One day, a pair of travelling geese stopped by. "Hello, friend," they honked. "You're so ugly that we rather like you. Why don't you become travelling birds like us?" They told him of a wonderful marsh nearby, full of charming lady geese. "They'll adore you," the kind geese promised. But just as the three birds took flight, there was a terrible bang, bang of gunshots ringing in the air. The ducklings' new friends dropped down dead into the rushes, and the waters ran red with their blood. Immediately, hunters and gun dogs came splashing through the swamp. The poor ugly duckling was terrified, but there was no time to hide in the reeds. One dog bared sharp fangs right at him and opened his wide jaws, but just as he was about to bite the duckling, he suddenly turned and ran off. "I'm so ugly that even a dog won't eat me," the poor duckling thought. He didn't know whether to be glad or sad. Winter arrived, bitterly cold. The water froze, and one night the duckling got stuck in the ice. He sat there until morning, when a farmer caught sight of him. He broke the ice with his wooden shoe and carried the duckling home to warm him by the fireside. But the duckling was terrified. He fluttered into the milk pail, splashing it all over the room, and landed in the butter tub. The farmer's wife was furious and chased him out into the cold. Back in the swamp, he spent a long and lonely winter, struggling to survive. At last the snows melted away and the larks began to sing. It was spring, and the duckling unfolded his wings. They were bigger and stronger than before and carried him high into the air. Before long, He found himself by a lovely lake, surrounded by lilacs and apple blossom. 3 magnificent swans, white and graceful, swam there. Their beauty filled the ugly duckling with despair. I'm so drab and grey, they will peck me to death, he thought. Though perhaps it's better to be killed by these majestic birds than scorned and starved. He bowed his head in misery, but as he did so, he suddenly saw his reflection in the water and got a shock. His ugly feathers were now snowy white. His neck was curved and slender. He had grown into a swan. The other swans glided over to him. Instead of biting him, they stroked him with their beaks. Nearby children shouted with joy at the sight of him. "There's a new swan," they cried, and threw him some crumbs. "Once I was an ugly duckling," he said, "and now I am the most beautiful of birds." But because he knew what it was like to be shunned and bullied, he was never cruel to another creature, and became the noblest of swans that ever lived.